everyone, and welcome to part 4 of our permaculture series. So for today's talk, I wanted to just touch on a few more of the principles of permaculture and give you a few ideas of how those can be put into practice. And again, hopefully these will just help to highlight a little bit more about the guiding principles and how they can be used and how you can interpret them in your own ways, really, and use them for whatever context you're working in. And also some of the ones I'm going to talk about are ones which are kind of well-known practices in terms of living a more sustainable life. So the first one is produce no waste. And so something that, again, we draw from nature, which doesn't produce any waste as such, or produces waste, but those wastes quickly become an input or a food supply or an ingredient for another natural process. And given in the context and the world in which we live, it's very difficult to live a life without producing waste if we be really realistic about a lot of these things and being more realistic about time and where we buy our things from. So it's just an example of something that you can try to do a little bit or try to do a lot. Try to do as best you can, and that might be by thinking about the things that you're buying. It might be about making use of recycling or reusing things, and kind of a sort of a bigger, maybe more national, global scale, thinking about redesign. So how can we actually design waste out of a lot of systems or products or materials that we're making? And there's lots of really interesting work being done around this, and it's always nice to see that happening. And it's not to say that we all have to do it perfectly, which is near impossible, but we can all be making a little bit of changes to our lifestyles, things that are simple and easy to do at home or in the workplace, so that everyone can do a little bit. So that's kind of, quite a sort of obvious one around waste and being sort of accountable to the materials that we're using, producing, consuming. And another principle is around catching and storing energy. So again, if you happen to be living on a piece of land and you had a homestead that you're running, or you're living kind of in a space where you've got space to do that or the means to do that, you might think about this in terms of harvesting rainwater that you could then use to water your crops and your plants. You might think about installing a solar panel to generate your own energy, so again making use of the sun. Could be, again, catching other resources that you might need on a kind of bigger scale, things like wind energy. And it's, we're limited again, kind of a lot of us in urban settings or in spaces where we don't really have that much control over those things. But that is one of the principles to think about, and you might interpret that in a different way. So another type of energy that you might catch, or a resource that you can store, doesn't necessarily have to relate to energy and water. So again, just a bit of a thinking point around what resources do you have available to you. Some things that you might have quite abundantly, which could be useful to store for later use. And something else that I wanted to talk about, which I haven't mentioned so much in the other parts, is one of the principles around patterns. So thinking about nature's patterns and using those as a design tool. And you can look lots of lovely examples up, but I'm just going to talk about a few that I really like. So lots of examples in nature have influenced, whether it's kind of an innovation or a technology. It might have influenced a piece of code, and a few that I really like. So one is how Velcro was invented. And the guy who invented Velcro was walking his dog kind of on a piece of land somewhere, and the seed head of a burdock plant got stuck in the coat of the dog. And when he looked quite closely at the seed head, he noticed that it had all these little hooks on. And the seed head has that pattern and has been designed in that way so that for that exact reason, to get stuck on an animal or something that's then going to travel somewhere else and spread its seed far and wide. It's kind of a survival technique for it spreading and colonizing an area as a plant. So he used that to design Velcro. Another one that I really like is looking at a termite mound and looking at how so often termites live in very kind of hot climates, and they build their mounds in a way which facilitates a kind of really effective ventilation system so that they don't overheat in the really hot sun. And buildings have now been designed incorporating that pattern and that technique. And if you're interested in looking up some more of those things, you might want to look up biomimicry, which is basically a sort of design process of observing things in nature and then using those ideas and those systems to create whether it's technology or design. So there's some really cool things like looking at butterfly wings and how they reflect the light that can then be used to design kind of screens which are more effective than LED lights. Also looking at things like the structure of bone filament. Have a look. If you just look up biomimicry, you'll find lots of really lovely examples. One more actually that I really like is a lotus leaf, which has a kind of self-cleaning technique. So lotuses often live in very dirty, muddy waters, and that has influenced the design of sort of paints and like kind of surface finishes, which are self-cleaning on buildings and other surfaces. So those are things to look at, and you can look at social patterns as well, whether that's looking at the structures of animals or things like the structure of a beehive, and really learn from those things and maybe find something that might be suitable for whether it's your project or something that you are working on. And the final principle that I wanted to talk about to kind of draw this series to a close is one which is quite a nice sort of overarching idea, and it's all around a kind of accepting the consequences of our actions. So we can apply self-regulation and then accept the feedback of that. So it's a little bit about keeping ourselves in check. And I really like thinking of it at both kind of a personal level, so kind of the social side, and also the environmental side. So a nice example in terms of the environmental side is around, you can think of something around foraging. So I always use the example of the elder tree. So the elder tree is something that gives us abundantly in terms of food and medicine. So in the spring we get the lovely flowers, and then in the autumn we get the berries. But if you pick all the flowers from the tree in the spring, there'll be nothing on that tree to be pollinated and form berries. So we have to remember to leave some, otherwise later in the season we won't get any. So it's thinking about, our actions and regulating those, and then seeing the feedback at the other side. And on a personal level, it's also about thinking a little bit about ourselves, and we all have limits that we can work to, and if we push those too far, we can burn out. So it's also about thinking about that on a very personal level, doing what we need to stay healthy and happy, and remembering that those things are really important, both as an individual level, but also within our families and our communities, and helping people to do that collectively. So a lot around sharing and caring. So that kind of brings this series to a close. If you've got any questions, pop them into the kind of comments below. And yeah, I haven't really done something like this before, so it'd be really lovely to hear your feedback. Also, if you're interested in learning more about permaculture, let us know and we will program in some more stuff. But thank you for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed it.